welcome to the deep dive. You've given us quite a collection of UFO stuff to go through here, articles, research, even some personal notes. So we're gonna sift through all of it, extract the good stuff, and really try to figure out what really matters in the world of UFOs.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually how the term UFO has almost become synonymous with aliens, but the reality is much more nuanced than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, like what even ISA, a UFO. I'm looking at some of your notes here, and it seems like the definition itself has been kind of all over the place.
Oh, absolutely. We've gone from, flying saucers, which that term was really popularized by Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting,
Right.
which, by the way, your source, the UFO Encyclopedia, really breaks down in fascinating detail. But yeah, we've gone from flying saucers to the more official unidentified flying object, or UFO, and now, even more recently, we're seeing unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, gaining some traction.
So it's not just about little green men anymore.
Not at all. The shift to UAP really reflects a broader perspective. It acknowledges that there might be things, happening up in our skies that we simply don't understand yet. And that's regardless of whether they're extraterrestrial or not.
Okay, that's kind of mind-blowing. But before we jump into the truly unexplained stuff,
Yeah.
um, let's talk about some of the stuff that we can explain.
Yeah.
The usual suspects. Your research mentions that a huge percentage of UFO sightings actually turn out to be, well, not so alien after all.
Exactly. And some of the explanations are surprisingly simple. One of your sources, The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, actually has a great section on this. Balloons, for instance, are a very common culprit.
Okay.
Think weather balloons, research balloons, even those celebratory sky lanterns, that people release at festivals.
Right. I could totally see how someone could mistake one of those for something a little more exotic, especially at night, or, if you're seeing it at a distance.
Absolutely. And then there are those celestial tricksters, bright stars, meteors, even planets like Venus can cause confusion. Your source, UFO investigations.
Yeah.
A scientific approach actually cites a case where a police officer reported a UFO that turned out to be, wait for it, the planet Jupiter.
Wow, Jupiter. That's almost too funny.
Yeah.
But I guess it just shows how easily our brains can be fooled sometimes, right?
Exactly. And speaking of our brains, one of your sources actually delves into the psychology of misidentification, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
Pareidolia, for example, is that phenomenon where we see familiar patterns, faces, or objects in random or vague stimuli, like seeing a bunny rabbit in a cloud formation.
Oh, totally. I do that all the time.
We all do. It's just our brains trying to make sense of the world around us. But
Okay.
in the context of UFO sightings, pareidolia can lead people to see spaceships where they're on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just about what's up there, but how our brains are interpreting what we see. But even with all of these explanations, there's still that kind of lingering question.
Hmm.
What about those sightings that don't fit neatly into these categories? What about the ones that truly make you go, huh, what was that?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's precisely where we're headed next.
Okay, so we've talked about the usual suspects, the balloons, the planets, the tricks our brains can play on us.
You're right.
But now I'm ready to dive into the really mysterious stuff. Your notes here mention Foo Fighters.
Oh, yeah.
What are those? It sounds like something out of a comic book.
It does, doesn't it? But Foo Fighters were actually a real phenomenon reported by pilots during World War II.
Really?
Yeah, imagine this. You're flying a mission, right? Tensions are high, and suddenly you see these strange glowing orbs or fireballs like near your aircraft.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, talk about unsettling.
That's crazy. So what did people think they were back then? Secret weapons?
Yeah.
Alien scouts?
Well, given the wartime context, a lot of folks suspected some kind of secret enemy technology. Um, your source, UFOs in the military, A Secret History actually dives into a few declassified documents that reveal just how seriously some governments were taking these reports.
Okay.
They were really worried about falling behind in some kind of advanced weapons race.
So even back then, UFOs were causing a stir in the halls of power.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But it sounds like the idea of aliens wasn't quite as prevalent back then as it is now.
Right.
Yeah, the real turning point in that regard came a few years later in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting.
Right.
Your notes here even have a copy of the original newspaper article.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Arnold was a pilot, and he reported seeing 9 crescent-shaped objects kind of zipping around Mount Rainier at incredible speeds.
Okay.
He described their movement as like saucers skipping across water, and bam, the term flying saucer was born.
Oh, so that's how it all started.
Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing how one guy's experience could spark a whole cultural phenomenon like that.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a great example of how, media coverage can really shape public perception.
Right.
Suddenly, everyone was looking up, expecting to see flying saucers, and of course, reports started pouring in from all over.
Yeah, this was the beginning of the whole like flying saucer craze.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And your sources suggest that the timing was no coincidence.
Yeah.
This was the dawn of the Cold War, the atomic age, a time of, heightened anxiety about potential threats from the skies.
Right.
People were really primed to believe that something strange and potentially dangerous was out there.
Yeah, it's like the whole UFO phenomenon tapped into this like deep-seated cultural fear.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that fear was only amplified by the fact that, nobody seemed to have any concrete answers.
Right.
Sure, there were plenty of theories, but no definitive proof of what these objects actually were.
So what did governments do? Did they just ignore all of this, or did they try to actually investigate these UFO sightings?
Oh, they definitely didn't ignore it. In fact, several governments around the world launched official investigations into UFOs.
Really?
Yeah, they were hoping to determine whether these objects pose any national security threats.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these investigations. I'm especially curious about Project Blue Book, which you've highlighted in your research.
Oh, yeah. Project Blue Book was a long-running U.S. Air Force program that investigated thousands of UFO reports between the 1950s and 1960s.
Okay.
They were very meticulous in their documentation, interviewing witnesses, analyzing radar data, and even collecting physical evidence when possible.
Wow.
One of your sources, the report on unidentified flying objects, is actually written by Edward J. Reppold, who headed Project Blue Book for several years.
So a first-hand account. That's cool.
Yeah. So what did they conclude?
Yeah, did they find any evidence of aliens?
Well, the official conclusion was that the vast majority of cases could be explained as misidentified aircraft weather phenomena or other conventional occurrences. But, and here's where it gets intriguing, a small percentage of cases remained unexplained.
Ah, those pesky unexplained cases.
Yeah.
So what did they make of those? Did they admit that maybe, just maybe, some of these things could be extraterrestrial?
Well, not quite. Project Blue Book officially stated that there was no evidence of extraterrestrial activity or any direct threat to national security.
Huh.
However, their reports also acknowledged that some cases defied explanation even after thorough investigation.
So even with all of their resources and expertise, they couldn't solve every mystery.
Right.
That's kind of comforting, actually.
Yeah.
It means we're not alone in being baffled by this stuff.
Exactly. And, the lack of definitive answers, the ambiguity surrounding those unexplained cases is precisely what fuels speculation and conspiracy theories.
Right. Because if the government can't explain it, then someone else will come up with an explanation, right?
Right.
And that's where we get into the whole world of government cover-ups and men in black and secret alien bases.
Exactly. And your sources really dive deep into this world, exploring how these theories often reflect deeper cultural anxieties about authority, secrecy, and the unknown.
Right.
One of your articles, The Psychology of UFO Conspiracy Theories, actually argues that these narratives often provide a sense of order and meaning in a world that can feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like finding a pattern, even if it's a fictional one, is more comforting than accepting that some things just don't have easy answers.
Right, but before we get too lost in the world of conspiracy theories, let's take a step back and look at the evidence itself.
Okay.
What kind of proof do people typically present to support UFO claims?
Yeah, good point. We've heard the stories, we've explored the history, but now it's time to put on our skeptical hats and examine the evidence. I'm thinking grainy photos, shaky videos, maybe even some weird metal fragments, supposedly from crashed alien spacecraft.
You're on the right track. Visual evidence is a big part of the UFO phenomenon, but as your sources point out, it's often the least reliable.
Okay, let's break that down. Why isn't visual evidence enough on its own? I mean, we're talking photos, videos, even those blurry blobs that people catch on their smartphone cameras these days.
Exactly. And while some of these might seem compelling at first glance, your sources really emphasize the importance of being critical.
Right, like how easy is it to fake a UFO photo or video these days? I feel like anyone with, some basic Photoshop skills could whip something up in minutes.
You're not wrong. And even without deliberate fakery, things like lens flares, camera shake, atmospheric conditions, they can really distort what we see, leading to misinterpretation.
Oh, right, so even if a photo looks like a spaceship, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a spaceship.
Right, and the same goes for videos, too. Your source, UFOs, Fact or Fiction, actually analyzes several viral UFO videos, and it kind of breaks down how things like perspective angles and video editing can create the illusion of something extraordinary.
Yeah, we have to be careful about taking things at face value.
Absolutely. And that's why your sources emphasize the importance of corroborating evidence. Did multiple people see the same thing? Was there any radar data or other physical evidence to support the visual claims? These are the questions we really need to be asking.
Makes sense. What about those like alien artifacts you hear about sometimes? Like pieces of metal or strange materials that people claim came from crashed UFOs.
Those are always intriguing. But again, without proper scientific analysis, it's impossible to say for sure where these materials come from. One of your sources, the UFO Handbook, actually cautions against jumping to conclusions about the origin of such artifacts.
Okay.
It mentions how things like industrial debris meteorites, even pieces of old satellites, can end up on Earth and be mistaken for something extraterrestrial.
Right. So basically, we can't just pick up a random piece of metal in the desert and declare it's from a flying saucer.
Exactly. It takes rigorous testing and analysis to determine the composition and the origin of any material.
Okay, so we've talked about visual evidence, physical traces.
Yeah.
What about radar data? That seems a bit more objective, right?
It can be, but even radar has its limitations. Your source, The Signs of UFOs, actually has a whole chapter on this.
Wow.
Radar systems can be fooled by things like atmospheric anomalies, flocks of birds, even weather inversions that can mimic the movement of solid objects.
So a blip on a radar screen doesn't automatically mean it's an alien spaceship?
Nope. And even when radar data seems to correlate with visual sightings, it's important to rule out all other possibilities before jumping to extraterrestrial conclusions.
Right. It seems like a recurring theme here is the need for scientific rigor. So has the scientific community as a whole really embraced the study of UFOs?
You know, it's been kind of a complex relationship. The lack of consistent, verifiable data, and, let's be honest, the sensationalism surrounding the topic has made it difficult for UFOs to gain mainstream scientific acceptance.
I can see how that would make a lot of scientists hesitant.
Mm.
If you can't reliably study something using the scientific method, it's hard to take it seriously.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean there haven't been serious attempts to study UFOs scientifically.
Mm.
You mentioned the Sturrock panel earlier.
Right.
They brought together a group of scientists to analyze existing evidence using a more rigorous framework.
And what did they find?
Well, they didn't reach any definitive conclusions about the nature of UFOs, but they did emphasize the need for a more open-minded and scientifically grounded approach to the subject. They categorized different types of evidence, identified areas where further research was needed, and called for greater cooperation between scientists and UFO researchers.
So even though there's still a lot of mystery surrounding UFOs, there are people out there who are trying to approach it from a scientific perspective.
Absolutely. And one of your sources, UFOs and the Future of Science, argues that the study of UFOs, if done properly, could actually lead to breakthroughs in our understanding of physics, astronomy, and even consciousness.
Wow, that's a fascinating perspective.
Yeah.
So even if we never find, definitive proof of alien spaceships, the search itself could lead to all sorts of new discoveries.
Precisely. And that brings us back to where we started. We've examined the evidence, we've explored the history, and we've considered the scientific perspectives. But ultimately, the question of whether or not we're alone in the universe remains unanswered.
Yeah, it's a question that has captivated humanity for centuries, and one that will likely continue to intrigue us for many years to come.
Absolutely. And while it's important to approach the unknown with a healthy dose of skepticism, it's equally important to remain open to the possibility that there are things out there that we simply don't understand yet.
So after this deep dive into the world of UFOs, what's your takeaway?
For me, it's the realization that the UFO phenomenon is more than just a collection of strange sightings. It's a reflection of our own curiosity, our fears, and our enduring desire to understand our place in the cosmos.
I love that. It's a reminder that the search for truth is often more important than the answers themselves. So to all you deep divers out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never lose your sense of wonder. Who knows what mysteries we might uncover together.